I have in the past made several videos criticising films set in ancient and medieval worlds for the various inaccuracies and just sillinesses in them, and in this video, which has been sponsored by Audible, brace yourself for an advert later, I'm going to be criticising instead some figures, little figurines made for gaming, and I see no reason why they should not be scrutinised in the same way. It's just a different art form, but a lot of the mistakes made are along the same lines. Now, these are fantasy figures, and a lot of people will say, oh, come on, they're fantasy figures. That just lets them off the hook, right? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If, oh, it's just fantasy, lets anything set in a supposedly fantastical world off the hook of everything, then standards will plummet. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be criticising them for historical inaccuracies. I'm not going to be saying, oh, that particular thing hadn't been invented by that particular year, because there is no particular year to which I would be referring, because they're fantastical. They're set in other worlds. So I'm not going to be saying that the clothing is not the fashion of some period or whatever. What period? It's fantasy. Fair enough. But you can't just say, oh, it's fantasy, and then ignore all the laws of physics and biology and common sense. So, a while ago, I backed some of the Kickstarters by Reaper Miniatures, and as a result ended up with loads and loads of white plastic miniatures, none of which I have painted, but I have separated them into 3 bags. There's the, oh yeah, they look terrific, can't wait to paint them up bag, and then there's the, not so sure, maybe something comes up that's specific to them later, and then there's eBay! And I'll be showing you figures from all 3 bags. Right, let's get started. So, some figures I liked. Take this guy. These are not the most practical clothes, those cuffs are not ideal for doing the washing up, but he could be some ceremonial guard, cultist, mage, or herald, or perhaps that's just his dressing gown. A useful, multi-purpose figure who looks easy to paint. Great. Here's another goodie, a nasty monster, not too gigantic and alien and scary. In fact, in the real world, creatures like this exist. There are carnivorous caterpillars not so very different, and they would be terrifying if we were the size of ants. Many figures seem to be trying to represent the nimble fighter who confidently relies on agility to stay safe. Unfortunately, their sculptors too much enjoyed giving them big hoods and swirling cloaks. Cloaks can be great for camouflage, but they really don't help in high-speed rooftop chases or when trying to use a bow. Now, you could say that, when the serious movement starts, then I'll ditch the cloak. Well, if this figure is you, then if you don't want to lose all your arrows, you'll have to take off your quiver, deftly set that down so that it doesn't spill, then take off your cloak, then put your quiver back on, and then you're ready for action. Oh no, you've been shot. A fat barkeep. Some clichés work fine. Giant bugs. We all need those. This figure I thought at first was too over the top, but then I saw it as a great work of loopy creativity. He has an imp on his shoulder, a pile of books and oddments, and yes, of course, a skull, got to have a skull, and a hat that makes Gandalf's look restrained, and a great hand gesture with tiny delicate fingers. Not useful, but fun. Here we have a spectacular dwarf figure. His hammer is immense, and which way is the wind blowing? His robes, which are long enough to reach the ground and then trail along it for a fair way, are billowing out in all directions at once. Has he just let go a spectacular fart? That might be one way to avoid tripping over his clothes. Ditching his robes would involve removing his belt and his backpack. This creature is enormous and very strangely proportioned. With little legs like that, I'd expect it to move like a gorilla on its knuckles. Despite its being so huge and muscular, they've still managed to give it an axe too big for it to wield. I suppose I could cut it down a lot. Being that big and lean would give it horrendous heat loss problems in cold weather. Designers really love dangling bits of armour between creatures' legs like this to get in the way, or worse. Is it an enslaved creature? Is that a controller's harness it wears? Anyway, my main objection to this figure is that it is far too big. How is this fight going to go? "Don't worry, princess," says the hero. "I'll save you." No, you won't. When the size mismatch is this big, it doesn't matter how good your armour is, nor how great your parrying technique is. Even if Hero Man does block with his shield of purest vibranium, the result is going to be this. This chap would look at home on the cover of a Conan book. Humans this muscular are modern bodybuilders and no one else. He has the standard farcically immense axe, a helmet with horns that would stop him turning his head, silly little things around his wrists, and leg things that go floof around his upper calves. But all that will do him naught if he goes up against even this more moderately enormous opponent. Look at it. The head of its mace is the size of his body. Its arms are as thick as both of his legs. You could remember how you stood no chance against the bigger boys at school, can't you? Well, if poor man's Conan here stands and fights, he's going to be turned into pate in a blink. I want figures that suggest that defeating them is at least possible. Here we have the massive figure of a giant with a normal man for comparison. Again, the muscularity is a problem. When you look at really big animals like elephants and hippos, they have rotund, heavy, hanging bodies. He also looks too human, too much like a figure of a normal-sized man in a different scale. Nothing suggests the hanging mass of his flesh, nor the fact that he must be a different species. I suspect that humans might actually be close to the limit of height with our configuration of skeleton. Tall people get a lot of back problems, and so just scaling up humans without a redesign would probably not work. A giant should look like a giant. Also, look at the sophistication of his kit. Ignore the fact that his sword is bent. That's just a consequence of the soft plastic he's moulded from. Look at the fanciness of it, and the decorated greaves and vambrace and pauldron. That suggests a sophisticated society of giants with giant mines and giant smelting works and giant ships to move the ore. It suggests a giant economy to drive all this. If your fantasy world has all of that, well then fair enough. But if they just gave him a tree trunk to hit people with, then he could be from anywhere and could be a loner or even a one-off monster. Here's a big, hefty, villainous-looking creature. You wouldn't want to bump into this guy on a dark night. Here we do see the bulk of his belly hanging as it should, the weight of a couple of cows there, but do those legs look capable to you of bearing that weight? He's meant to be an aquatic creature, hence the webbed feet, but his body is far from sleek and hydrodynamic. Those big scales sticking out of his back look inspired by a stegosaurus, which wasn't aquatic. His big hands are not webbed at all. I say, make your mind up. If this thing lives in water, then you have to go the whole hog with its design. Follow the logic of the biology through. Here we have a giantess, and judging by the baldness of her legs, she was sculpted to appeal to a different market. Skellies, of course. These aren't the greatest skellies, but you can never have too many, and they are easy to paint once you know what you're doing. The poses are very flat. These are one-piece figures, while many of the others are multi-piece and so more three-dimensional. This compromise explains a lot of the very bizarre and unrealistic poses, like that of this little fellow.
I'm coming out of the mould, and you can't stop me!
I love this figure. No idea what I'd use it for, but that can come later. A frogman wearing a mask made from the skull of some other creature and carrying a narwhal's tusk and what looks like a pufferfish tied on the end. There's no need for a sophisticated society and infrastructure to explain this figure. This fella just made his kit from stuff he found. Women come in two basic sizes. A very rare sort is somewhat matronly, as we see here with this lady carrying lots of tankards, but almost all are worryingly thin and arching their backs to painful angles to stick their chests out. Now, I do get it that super slim female figures might sell well, but is it too much to ask for a few more women of more normal proportions? In the main, these figures are supposed to represent adventurers and other desperados. You're not going to win many running races in that outfit, and her hair uses as much plastic as her torso and legs. Yes, I'll admit I did put this in my to-paint bag. It's some evil ruler's throne of obvious evil. It's covered in skulls, and I have a fairly low tolerance for skulls, and it is a bit daft that any ruler would advertise his evil so flagrantly. I don't know what it's supposed to be made of. It would be a bit weak in stone. To use it, I'd have to come up with some quite convoluted excuse. A lawbreaker was punished by being made to use it. Skulls are considered lucky in this society. I just thought it would be a quick and therefore fun thing to paint. This is a very animated figure, an owlbear in what looks like a frenzied charge. Again, it's a bit big, but it's a great sculpt, really three-dimensional. It's a little strange that the wing-like webbing is on the leading edge of its arms, which requires a bit of explanation. It's not the way flying squirrels do it. But my main comment here is that this wild animation makes for a less multi-purpose figure. If the referee describes the animal as calmly chomping on some food and says, "It doesn't look as though it has noticed you," then this figure doesn't really convey that picture. For a rarely encountered creature, though, this isn't very important. For character figures, though, I feel it is more important. Hello, please ignore these two huge scimitars I'm brandishing. It's just because I don't have any scabbards to put them away in. So anyway, Your Majesty, when did you last see your daughter? This is more of a multi-purpose pose. Yes, he has his sword drawn, which makes a lot of conversation a bit tense. What windy weather we're having. But he could be just talking to someone, or making his way through a dungeon, or be in the middle of a fight. He does have those turned-down long boots, though, which I wish were rarer. Now, here is a very rare woman figure that is neither fat nor stick-thin. But what's going on here? She's holding her shield wrongly, that's a centre-grip shield, and her sword is a bit big and seems to be both in her hand and in her scabbard. But forget that. She's wearing a battle skirt. How is she supposed to run in that? A great figure for a Wagnerian opera diva, perhaps, but not a fighter. I like this figure and intend to paint it because, well, just look at it. But you'll see that it is bursting out of the ground, which will look a bit odd when it gives chase across the table. But it also tells us that this is a burrowing creature. And yet look at its scaly back. Look at the way those scales protrude, overlap, and are pointed at the corners. This is a creature that could go only in one direction underground, and that is forwards. But burrowing creatures live in burrows and are rubbish at organising bypasses and one-way systems. Real-world burrowing insects are sleek. Moles have unusual fur because it has no direction to it, and so it proves no hindrance or discomfort when the moles walk backwards. The naked mole rat has a different solution and has lost its fur and developed loose skin to help it move in tight burrows. Another burrowing creature, based this time on Sydney Opera House. This one has suitable, short, stubby limbs with massive claws, just like real-world burrowing animals, and a jutting prow of a chin to help it through. But again, it has scales that are strictly one way. If this thing were digging its way through some suitably very deep soil and met a rock face, it would be stuck. I think I'll forgive that one extra-large top scale. Explaining it away is a springboard to creativity. Perhaps it can raise it and lower it out of the way. Perhaps it signals aggression with it. Perhaps, when raised, it reveals the orifice through which it can emit a tunnel-shaking, siren-like wail. This lady has heavily armoured arms and legs, and yet nothing much to protect her head or body with its prominent boobies. Describing her clothing as flowing is an understatement. I'd say it's a figure of a woman in a gale cutting her wedding cake, which is a bit specialist.
Ah, so you're watching this video, are you? You're into fantasy, huh? Dungeons and Dragons, that sort of thing? Yeah. Well, in that case, you might be interested in my sponsor, Audible. Audible is a vast online library of audio books and audio recordings of all sorts of spoken word kinds. You know, memoirs and business advice and keep fit programs and celebrity memoirs, if that's what you're really into. But if you're into fantasy, then maybe you'd like to take advantage of the free trial, which is available, a 30-day free trial. All you have to do is go to www.audible.com/LindyBeige, or if you prefer, text LindyBeige to 500 500. Then you get a 30-day free trial and unlimited access to the Audio Plus catalogue, which is loads and loads of selected audio books, plus all the comedy shows and all the Audible original stuff they produce themselves, often with quite famous stars and the like. Yes, and When you become a full member, every month you can download, to keep forever, it's yours, one audiobook for free, and then you can listen to it offline, wherever you are, jogging, commuting, wherever it is. You don't have to be online, because it's yours, you see, it's on your device, because you have devices, don't you? Yes, and perhaps you should be listening to the stories of Farfod and the Grey Mouser. You see, if you're really into D&D and the like, you might want to know what really influenced it. What was Gary Gygax and all those people who were writing the original rulebooks, what were they reading? Obviously they read Tolkien. You know about Tolkien and Conan. You've heard of Conan. But have you heard all the stories of Farfod and the Grey Mouser? In your fantasy world, is there a thieves' guild? Where do you think that idea came from? Swords and sorcery, the term itself, was coined by Fritz Lieber, who wrote the tales of Farfod and the Grey Mouser. And, well, I've been on the Audible site, and they've got loads and loads of tales of Farfod and the Grey Mouser. And many of them are exclusive to Audible, so it's the only way you're going to get to hear them. So, yes, maybe if you're really into fantasy, you should take advantage of this free trial.
You want turntables? I can do a turntable on a turntable on another turntable. And look, I can make one go the other way. And oh, I'm regretting that already. Now, with some figures, it is difficult to tell if they were going for comedy or not. With his tiny head and his horned helmet that would catch blows from many angles and prevent head movement very effectively, his awkward shield, sword that would have to have been made out of foam rubber to be wieldable at all, bonkers shoulder armour, and plates around the groin which might castrate him if he sat down quickly. I suppose he could play a joke villain character in a stage play within an adventure. This tiny but uncommonly busty waif, who seems to have forgotten almost all her clothes, is depicted with an axe she'd have trouble lifting, let alone using. I'm guessing she's minding it for a friend. Ah yes, mummies. Well, they seem to be a popular monster, even though they are at heart just skeletons with a load of hampering cloth. They usually give them lots of magic oomph. Anyway, the problem that always strikes me is that monster mummies always have separate arms and legs so that they can walk about, but actual mummies had many layers of bandaging, bindings and shrouds which very thoroughly bound all their limbs up. So if one came alive, all it could do was wriggle a bit. True enough, many mummies had inner layers that treated the limbs separately, but to get there, a mummy would either need a friend to remove several outer layers, or to be channeling Houdini. This young lady, with the straps arranged down the huge shield, good luck lifting that, love, is actually wearing high-heeled sabatons and quite inadequate arse armour. She has no scabbard for that humongous sword, and the shape of her spiked pauldrons would make it very dangerous for her to raise her arms. Best use for this figure, a catwalk model in a military haute couture fashion show? Yet another left-hander and yet another character in a gale. These swirling cloaks must look very out of place indoors. Her pose with that staff has something of the pole dancer about it, and clearly none of these women is worried about being hit in the thigh. Oh, here's a great fantasy creature, a tortoise man. Deep texture makes it easy to paint, and there's no need to imagine a civilization with complex supply chain to explain his kit. His weapon is a stick, and his shield is the shell of a small tortoise. He's a good size, too, not too big for a human to take on. These rats are well sculpted with good ratty poses and expressions, but there is a problem of scale here, which you'll appreciate when you see them next to a man. Rats do not have to be this big to be scary. In fact, I find the thought of one as big as a cat scarier. Edith, the rat problem's back. Now, this girl is just skeletally thin. I mean, this really is going too far. I'm beginning to see what people mean by dangerous body images. It is a skeleton. Oh, well, fair enough. Here's a very multi-purpose monster figure, a hideously mutated cave creature, the pitiful result of experimental magic, a hero cursed by the gods, a ghastly flesh golem, the thing that crawled from the chaos ooze. With few details needing their own colours and lots of texture, the sculptor has done most of the painter's work for him. I think I should say something about scale creep. When Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin wrote Chainmail in 1971, they intended it for the 25mm figures of their day. that were 25mm tall. Chainmail morphed into Dungeons & Dragons with its 1 inch to 5 feet grid system, and that worked fine with these figures. You could get a few of them in a square if needed. Today, people complain that 1 inch isn't enough room even for one. Well, manufacturers and sculptors all wanted to make their figures bigger and better, and after a bit, 25mm figures were measured to the eye, not the top of the head, then from the top of the foot, and some companies said they were 28mm, and then this crept ever upwards, and then came heroic scale, or whatever that is. You see here the result, a figure sculpted circa 1980 with one circa 2015, so different as to be incompatible. I prefer the smaller. This is a style of figure I dislike. Oh wow, someone might say, what a cool assassin figure. No! There should be no such thing. If an assassin looks like an assassin, then he's failed. If you turn up to your assassin audition looking like an assassin, they'd assassinate you for being so stupid.
Hi, I'm a cute girl who kills people for some reason, and I spend most of my time landing after dropping down from a height. Do you like my throwing daggers?
No, I don't. Guards, arrest that miscreant. Hello. My name's Sir Adrian, and I think I've pretty much got the set. A massive sword, left-handedness, no helmet, pauldrons that pretty much pin my arms in place, a cloak that attaches actually under my armour at the back so it's near impossible to get it off, and which billows outwards in all directions when it's not tripping me over. When I use my power flatulence feat. Well done. You're quite the contender.
No, I, Oragath the unrealistic, am the greatest. I have a huge armoured thing that hangs all the way down to the ground between my legs, which is guaranteed to trip me up, a backscabbard, left-handedness, a tiny barbute helmet with gargantuan horns on it, which threaten to break my neck if I turn my head too fast, out little leather things around my wrists, and a bow the shape of which defies all explanation.
Yikes, that does shift the bar quite a bit. A longsword that comes up to your armpit is a very long sword, much too long for my taste. And here again we see pauldrons that are a major threat to the head. Pauldrons, that's shoulder guards, especially those with haut pieces, those bits that stick up, close in on the head from either side when you raise your arms. My own pauldrons have very modest haut pieces, mounted at an angle and far from the neck, and yet still, if I raise my arms, they threaten to crush my head.
There, my haut pieces are hitting me in the side of the head, but I really do have to get to there, and I could still hold a sword like that without that happening. Although, of course, my head will be bigger when I've got a helmet on.
Here's a skelly with a lot of the same problems. Armour hanging down between the legs, wide-topped turned-down boots, farcical axe, pauldrons that would crush its skull if it could sneeze, a breastplate worn on the back, and you may notice that its shield is a skull. I don't like undead figures that feature undead motifs. It suggests that the person knew before he died that he would become an undead and chose to prepare his kit accordingly. I think it's creepier if you can see some remnant of the people that they once were. Here again, full-length skirts that, if they could stop flipping billowing for 1 second when hanging straight, would trip the wearer. He's probably wearing turned-down wide-topped boots under there too. So why am I so harsh on wide-topped boots? Well, because they were a piece of fashion wear from the early 17th century that were not practical. If you swing your legs forwards, as normal to walk, then the tops hit each other awkwardly, so you have to adopt a strange gait to avoid this. It's not good for adventuring. What have we here? Bad pauldrons, a back scabbard for a sword taller than the man, as well as another massive sword in his hand. Also a back spear, which I suppose is not impossible, but not very handy either. Oh, and a plate hanging between his legs. Is it hinting at something? Big sword, bare thighs, horned helmets, floofy lower leggings, and, of course, boob plates. Look at this little chap. His mace is bigger than his head. It is bigger than his head. Do you want to know how big real typical medieval mace heads were? They were this big, and trust me, you do not want to be hit by one of these. Oh, I quite like this goblin-type figure. I like that he's barefoot, rather short arrows, and oh, can we not just once have a bow that is a simple, sensible shape? Most bows were just a straight stick that was bent. At least it doesn't have any ribbons on it. Oversized leggings, bare thighs, leggings of floof, no scabbard, and look at the muscularity! He looks as though his body is exploding. Oh, do we have a winner? Oh no, wait, he's not left-handed. It doesn't matter how big and strong they make the creature, they never seem to catch up with their weapon sizes. This is a gorilla with wings, with very big hands and wings. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I suppose if I took the wings off, I'd have a gorilla with very big hands. I think what impressed the judges here is that the pauldron, the shoulder armour, extends all the way to the wrist, which is rare. Now this one I know was an intentional Halloween costume figure, but others seem to belong with it that perhaps took themselves more seriously. Sexy pirate costume? No. Sexy witch costume? No. And we have a winner for the most effective pauldrons of self-decapitation competition. This reptilian creature, floating on a column of its own reptilian farts, here is sculpted in the act of crushing its own head. Just a tiny raise of one arm was enough, and we see him screaming his death howl. And another one of these. Oh, show me a real woman. Could you tell me the price of these apples? No! Stop attacking me! Another catwalk model. Pole dancer. Very pretty, but I don't think that flashing your petticoats like that is going to work on the ogre chief. You are literally wearing high heels, and if you lean back any more, your spine will snap. And another. And appearing now to show a male unattainable body, floof, axe, billow, pauldron, dangly. Hammer of unwieldiness, pauldrons of self-decapitation, cloak of hindrance, dangly thing of annoyance, cuisses, that's thigh guards, of sit down and they stab you. Oh, for goodness sake, that shape is for an electric guitar. And put some flipping clothes on.
Hi, I've got daggers. Don't you think they're cute?
No, no. Behold, the trident of go away and take your silicon boobs with you. Well. Look, there's tall and thin, and then there's being shown in the wrong screen aspect ratio. Oh, stop posing, and pick a wind direction. He has got the set. Oh, no dangly armour between his legs. Are they basing sword sizes on computer games now?
I've been doing Pilates. Also, I've changed my morning diet regime.
Not just the length of a man's sword can you judge him by, but also by the billowiness of his... Next! Where are your scabbards? Studded leather is rubbish. And take your cloak off. You've got a breastplate on your back. One stupendously oversized sword wasn't enough? Have you lost your helmet? Nice dangly.
Come on and rock me Asmodeus.
If I run just a little bit harder, I think I can fall out of this dress.
I think I shall call you Tim.
Berserker!
Boob plates. Whoa! The biggest sword of them all. The dangly, the helmet, the pauldrons, and a gratuitously exotic shield shape. Scabbard 1/5 the size of your sword's blade, full-length male skirt, and yes, isn't it windy?
I'm not evil, it's just an aesthetic.
I had this armour designed for me in anticipation of being reincarnated as something with no legs. It was very awkward before I died, mind. Why don't you use your scythe to trim your robes? Oh, I see the blade set at the wrong angle. See my video on scythes. Where's He-Man when you don't need him? Next! What a dangly.